us a promise. There's a time lapse. There's a process we have to go through between the promise and the provision. And I call that the law of the 4 P's. So God gives us a promise. We have to apply the principle. Then we face a problem, and then we receive the provision. We need to realize, I've never seen a scripture where God says, I'm going to do this. He always says, if you do this, I'm going to do that. There is always a principle according to go with God's promise. So God's promise is linked to a principle, which is a condition, which is followed by a problem, which is a temptation, and then we see the provision. Many Christians find it difficult to understand how God would use a problem as part of his plan to bring us into his provision. We need the problem to prepare for the provision. James 1:12, the Amplified Bible says, blessed, happy, to be envied is the man who is patient under trial and stands up under temptation. For when he has stood the test and has been approved, he will receive the victor's crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. The problem is the central part of the journey between the promise and the provision. Our behavior in the problem determines to what extent, how soon, and even whether or not we'll ever receive our provision. During our problem or our wilderness experience, we face 3 alternatives. Do we go another lap? Our initial negative response to the problem leads us to an extended stay in the wilderness. God provides a similar set of circumstances to give us a chance at another lap around the same problem. I want you to understand that with God, we never just fail the test. We get to take another test and another test and another test until we pass. The second alternative is, do we become bleached bones? Repeated negative responses causes us to perish in the wilderness. It does not mean that we lose our eternal salvation, but rather that we will not receive our promised provision. 1 Corinthians 3 verses 14 and 15 says, if what he has built survives, he will receive his reward. If it is burnt up, he will suffer. He himself will be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames. The third alternative is we can stand and enter. Response is position. We choose to stand on God's principle through the problem. We enter our provision with little or no delay. You see, when the Israelites came across the Red Sea, God did a miracle. God took care of the enemies behind them. The sea came back and swallowed up the army and all the horses. The Israelites sing a victory song. They now enter the wilderness and they face 3 days without water. They then arrive at Marah, where the water is bitter. Notice God allowed the problem to find out, did they or didn't they trust in him? The Bible shows us they responded negatively. Again, I want to encourage you to go to our website, which is kingdomsuccesstv.com. We want you to sign up to be on our mailing list where you will receive updates, you will receive information from Dr. Andres. We also invite you to come and visit Higher Ground Church on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, which is on Route 162 in Maryville, just off Route 159. We would love to see you. We would love to serve you. Now, many times we ask God for help with our bosses. Oh God, he is my enemy. Take care of my enemy. You expect God to remove the boss or to turn him into a nice person. Instead, the boss becomes harder than before. Is God not answering your prayer? Of course he is. He is dealing with your worst enemy, which is your pride and your unyielding ego. Once we ask God to deal with our pride and our ego, a miracle happens. Overnight, the boss becomes surprisingly kind and understanding and such a nice guy. Did the boss change? No, we change. We always blame difficulties on circumstances, expecting God to change them. What we should realize is that the biggest problem is our attitude. God can change circumstances instantly, but when he doesn't, it is because he wants to change something in us. The circumstances are there to change something in our hearts, in our minds, in our thinking, something that needs to be changed. Back to the Israelites. Next, they camp along palm trees besides 12 springs of water. Once again, God showed them he could provide. Then, wilderness again. This time, they cannot find anything to eat. They're facing the same problem, but different disguise. Instead of undrinkable water, no food. Same devil, different uniform. Bitter water is a type of laxative, and laxatives in the spirit is needed to clean us out. If our first response to the problem is negative, God's alternative will be to meet the immediate need and move us on. But then he provides a similar set of circumstances to confront us with the